All right, folks, welcome. Good evening and welcome to the Monday night live stream. How's everybody doing today so far? Where y'all tuning in from? Big shout out to you, D. I see you in here. Greg, what's going on? RM from New York City, what's going on? Welcome, good to see you in here. All right, so basically tonight, I'm going to be covering a few things tonight. Now, first off, I want to talk a little bit about heart health and do a video review of one of my favorite doctors, right? Dr. Sten Ekberg. And he has done a video of the top 10 foods that will destroy your heart, right? So destroy your heart, right? So these are pretty strong claims that he made about these 10 foods. So we're going to dive into this video. I watched a little bit of it, but I haven't dived all the way through. So I just wanted to go over that with y'all. Because you know what? I don't do these video reviews very often. But you know what? This is a good one. So I'm like, you know what? I gotta talk about this a little bit. So how am I doing tonight? I'm doing all right. I'm doing pretty good. You know, can't complain. Feeling pretty good tonight. Put a 1 in the chat if you can hear me clearly, if my audio is good. I'm coming through nice and crisp with y'all. You know what I'm saying? I learned a lot about setting up my audio last week on this mic I got going on here. And I don't have to worry about having the excess curvature in my back, you know, from leaning into the mic that I had on the desk. So I got a little bit more freedom here. Dominica, what's going on? Welcome, good to see you in here. DG with the 4 ones. We got the 1s on 1s. Joanne, what's going on? Welcome, good to see you in here. David, all right. Folks, hit the like button too. Let's push this thing up in the algorithm a little bit. Let's see how far we can get it. You know what I'm saying? Hit that like button. Let me talk about some dope stuff tonight. But you know what? I'm gonna let y'all choose. I'm gonna let y'all choose. What would y'all like for me to start with talking about? Would y'all like me to talk more about a fruitarian diet, especially for muscle building and body transformation? Or would you like me to start with the video review? Which one would y'all like me to start with? Put a, for the fruitarian diet, put an F in the chat. And for the video review, put an R in the chat. Well, let's see which one y'all want me to start with first. So let's tally it up. So we got a V, we got a V. I don't know what the V's are. You mean an R? So we got an F for fruitarian, we got an R for review. So far we got 2 R's. We got 1 F. Y'all want to see that review? We got an F. All right, Dominica with the F. We got the F. Oh, we got, look at this. So far we got, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, the F's have it. So for the fruitarian diet, we're gonna start with that. That's what it looks like. The F's have the room. I'm gonna get over to both, but basically, I'm gonna start with the one that y'all prefer the most. All right, so the F's have it. So let's get into it. All right, so with a fruitarian diet, there's many different ways to do a fruitarian diet. Some of the biggest concerns is sugar, lack of protein, things of this nature, right? So I want to get to all of the concerns and how to structure a fruitarian diet and, you know, what are the easy parts of it, what are the challenges, and how to navigate that, all right? And then, of course, there is a certain emotional aspect to it, right? Because, you know, a lack of warm food, all the foods that you're eating are like a kick in the mouth and very sweet, that kind of thing. So it's very different from what most people are used to. But in my experience, it's been one of the most phenomenal diets. Now, for me, in my experience, doing like a heavily fruit-based diet, one of the biggest benefits that I experience from doing that personally is mental focus, a drastic improvement in mental health, sleep quality, better digestion, all of that. Overall, lower stress, feeling really good, having a lot more energy, being able to think a lot clearer, and of course, dropping body fat and recovering quicker, right? As far as training, which is a big part for me. A fruitarian diet. Now, you can be on a heavily fruit-based diet and not really lose any weight, okay? Just because you're on a fruit-based diet doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be super lean and shredded and athletic looking. It doesn't. That's not necessarily the case. You could be trying to lose weight and be on a fruit-based diet, and there is a possibility that you may not lose weight. All right, and so I'm gonna get into that. Now, on a fruit-based diet, it can be very advantageous to use that way of eating to build muscle mass, and it's very conducive to that if you do it right. Okay, so there's certain rules. So let's use me for an example. Let's say I wanted to use a fruit-based diet, and I said I want to create a body transformation. I want to drop body fat and simultaneously build muscle. Is this a good diet for me? All right. So the answer is yes. Now, what I can do personally is I can ensure that I'm getting enough protein in my diet by adding in a smoothie. Okay, so I can do a smoothie with 10 or 12 ounces of plant-based milk. For me personally, that would be soy milk. Soy milk tends to be the most nutritionally dense form of plant-based milk, all right, with the highest amount of protein. So your average soy milk has in between 6 to 8 grams of protein per cup. Very rich source of calcium, which is very important for muscular training performance, right? Calcium is actually necessary to produce muscular contractions in general, right? Fortified with vitamin D, right? So you got a large part of your vitamin D covered with plant-based milk, right? So then there's that aspect as well. And then there's iron, copper, magnesium, manganese, these kinds of things in it as well. Then on top of that, naked pea protein, right, is what I use, or pea protein isolates, basically just pea protein or protein made from peas, right? It's one ingredient, it's just peas, right? Then cacao powder, right? Then PB Fit, which is powdered peanuts, I like to use. Then moringa leaf powder, which is basically dehydrated and pulverized moringa leaves from a moringa tree, right? And if you have high blood pressure or you're insulin resistant or type 2 diabetic, moringa leaf is actually very beneficial for you. Okay, it's actually very good for improving insulin sensitivity and aids in weight loss. And you add cacao powder to that, and that also does the trick as well, right? So having a smoothie like that, and you can add a pinch of sea salt or a quarter teaspoon of sea salt to it if you want. In a smoothie, I don't particularly add salt to a smoothie. I would just leave that out. And then you can also add a teaspoon of cinnamon to it, right? Ceylon cinnamon in particular, which also helps to reverse insulin sensitivity. So right out the gate, you can start your day actually with a smoothie like this. And from a smoothie like that, you can get around 70 grams of protein right out the gate from a smoothie like that. All right? So there's that. And then, of course, if you want to make it a little bit sweeter, okay, because that could be kind of bitter, you can add coconut sugar to it. A tablespoon, 2 tablespoons at the most to it, right? So boom, you're covered on that. Then for the rest of the day, you're just going to be focusing on loading your body up with the carbohydrates to fill your muscle with glucose that is stored as glycogen, all right? And there's a hormonal advantage to doing that. So let's say I work out, I wake up in the morning and I work out, I do 20 to 30 minutes of resistance bands or weightlifting, and I push a given set of muscle groups as hard as I can within that 20 to 30 minutes, and then have that post-workout smoothie, right? And then I can eat on top of that. I can have, let's say, 4 to 6 bananas, or even 8 bananas, Okay. Bananas are a very rich source of magnesium, manganese, potassium, even things like zinc, tons of carbohydrates, right? And pretty much every banana has at least a gram of protein in it. All right, so on top of the 70 grams of protein that you got from the smoothie, you get another, if you ate 4 bananas, you get like 4 or 5 grams of protein from that. If you ate 6 bananas, it's like 6 to 7, right? Added onto that 70 grams right there. And then you're all carved up from doing that, right? And all of that ends up in the muscle belly. And the reason why that's important is because when you eat the bananas, that gets broken down, the carbohydrates get broken down into glucose and gets sent to the muscle tissue. The fructose gets sent to the liver, converted into glucose, and then further sent to the muscle tissue, right? In an auxiliary fashion. Now, hormonally, muscle protein synthesis is at its peak when glycogen stores are filled, okay? When a muscle is adequately fueled, this is going to trigger extra protein or muscle protein synthesis, all right? So it's kind of like you're filling up the energy bucket, right? Because protein synthesis is very energy intensive. If your glycogen is depleted, your body's going to have a lack of energy and then prioritize breaking down fat in order to bring back up your blood sugar levels and get more glucose into the muscle tissue, right? In order to sustain the adequate function of that muscle tissue. So your body is now going to deprioritize muscle growth and now prioritizing making up the lack of energy, right? From there being a lack of glucose stored inside the muscle tissue, right? So your body chooses, do we maintain homeostasis or do we focus on building new infrastructure, new tissue, and improving the infrastructure, right? Which one do we prioritize? Because your body does both at the same time, but will prioritize one over the other, right? So if the muscle is filled and adequately fueled, then your body will focus more so on utilizing that fuel. All this extra fuel can now be utilized to build new hormones, to build more neurotransmitters, to build more muscle fibers, etc. Okay, so you want to keep your body in this building state. So scientifically, there's 2 phases your body's in: anabolic, catabolic. All right? Anabolic is when something is being built up, and catabolic is when something is being broken down. When you're training a muscle, and that muscle is going through wear and tear and fatigue, that's a catabolic stage. Afterwards, when you replenish and refuel your body, that puts your body in an anabolic stage. If your stored glycogen levels deplete, as they deplete, you're now in a catabolic stage, okay? So now you get into fat breakdown and you get into amino acid breakdown because your body has to find the extra fuel somewhere, okay? So it's gonna have to break other things down and recycle that into usable energy to keep your energy levels up, right? And this is how your body reaches homeostasis and maintains that. So these are the choices you have. So like, let's say my goal is I want to eat in between 400 and 500 grams of carbs per day in order to keep my muscles energized and things, right? And I'm going to do this, I'm going to prioritize this earlier in my day. So I'm going to have a bundle of bananas, I'm going to have a whole cantaloupe. And the cantaloupe, I'm a very big fan of cantaloupe because of the high levels of beta carotene that is converted into vitamin A, which is extremely important to muscle growth, eye health, hair, skin, and nails, maintaining your organs, your whole entire cardiovascular system, everything, fat metabolism, all that kind of stuff. Brain health, vitamin A is essential to this process, right? Testosterone levels, all this kind of stuff. And that vitamin A is also essential to building new muscle tissue, right? So that beta carotene is abundant in fruits with a orange or yellow pigment, particularly the orange pigment. So cantaloupe, this big beautiful orange pigment is going to contain that beta carotene, right? So having that whole cantaloupe, that's going to give you like roughly 11 grams of protein. Your average cantaloupe is around 3 to 4 pounds, more so along the lines of 3 pounds. A 4 pound cantaloupe, it's more along the lines of a larger cantaloupe. So it's kind of like 3.5 pounds on average. So this is going to get you a caloric value of in between 400 and 500 calories. You're going to get, I don't know, in between 150 to 200 grams of carbs, somewhere around there. Maybe it's less than 200 grams of carbs. I don't remember the exact number. I think maybe like 111 or 120, somewhere around there. And then 11 grams of protein, 10 or 12, somewhere around there. Then cantaloupes also are a rich source of vitamin E as well. And then of course you got iron, copper, magnesium, manganese, potassium. Potassium is a big one. Vitamin C, B vitamins. And cantaloupe is very rich in an amino acid called glutamine, which is also essential to muscle recovery and sleep quality. The list of benefits for cantaloupe is a lot longer than that, but I'll leave it there, right? So you got your bananas, you got your cantaloupe, and then on top of that, now you can scale to, like, let's say 4 cups of grapes, for example. Grapes are high in iron, copper, vitamin C. You get quercetin, B vitamins, all kinds of stuff. Extremely beneficial. By the way, cantaloupe is also high in pyridoxine, which is essential to healthy nervous system function and brain chemistry. Right? So I believe that's vitamin B6. And grapes also have an abundance of this as well, right? And grapes are very good for kidney health, liver health, fat metabolism, all types of stuff, right? And it's a very, very big and important source of antioxidants that protect your brain chemistry, protect all of your organs, your cardiovascular system, regulate your cholesterol, cortisol, adrenal function, etc. Right? Grapes are one of the best fruits, right? It's like right up there with like blueberries or something like that, or raspberries, right? Big deal. And then of course you got citrus fruits. I'm a big fan of grapefruit, okay? And one of my favorite combinations is having a grapefruit with like 4 kiwis, okay? And so having, the abundance of the fruit bowls, and that's gonna add up, and you can get like 30 grams of protein from fruit, and then, an extra few 100 grams of carbohydrates from fruit also. And fruit in particular is anti-obesogenic, meaning fruits are clinically and scientifically proven and epidemiologically proven to reverse obesity. All right, so there's all kinds of like statistical data that shows that the more fruit you eat, the more body fat you release, right? And the easier it is for you to drop weight, right? So this is just a statistically, clinically verified thing. Okay, and I can show you guys studies of this later on if you want. All right. And so that's pretty much the deal there. And then, of course, you got to know when to stop eating. So you typically want to stop eating about like 6 hours before bed. If you really want to be aggressive with it, it can be 8 hours before bed, and that kind of thing. But you don't want to eat be on a full stomach and go straight to sleep, right? Probably don't want to do that. And so basically, this is a very low-fat way of eating, meaning your dietary fat is going to be in between like 9 and 12%, okay? If you eat mangoes are a bit higher in fat and maybe a little bit higher. By the way, mangoes are also an amazing source of beta-carotene for that vitamin A. But yeah, so these fruits that I just mentioned are like muscle food. Okay, and if your diet is mostly carbohydrates, this is fuel that's very easy for your body to tap into. Okay, and it's very easy for your muscle tissue to tap into. And all of these fruits, the interesting thing about fruit is the micronutrients in fruit optimize oxygen uptake, which is extremely important for fat metabolism. Fat metabolism peaks with oxygen uptake. So more oxygen uptake equals more fat burn, essentially. All right, let me get some messages over here in the Discord. All right. Hold on a second here. Let me send the folks the link. Make it a little bit easier. We're getting some folks didn't get the word here. Oh, Dominica, you in here? Yeah, here we go. Okay. Let me catch up with y'all in these comments because I know y'all be saying stuff in here, right? Everyone hit the like button. That's right. Big shout out to D after 50. Killing it. Let's see. Oh, Alanis, there you go. You in here. Juju, big shout out to you. It says message retracted. What did we retract? Wow, this is great information. Didn't know that Cantaloupe did all of that. That's right, Cantaloupe is clutch. Miss MJ, what's going on? Good to see you in here. See, that's what we got going on as far as the fruit, right? Create your ideal body, right? A muscle body transformation. Okay, this is the substrate. How we do it. All right. What else can I say? Now, let's say you're not particularly a very active person. You don't work out very much. You should. But let's say you don't for whatever reason. Maybe you're in a wheelchair or you have very limited use of your body. Well, if you have very limited use of your body, chances are you're not really going to be eating as much as somebody who's a bit more active. So obviously, you would just scale back how much you eat. So where you wouldn't need to eat about like 3 to 4 meals or so, right? You could probably have the smoothie and 1 or 2 meals and you'd be good, right? Now, you don't have to worry about getting obese from a really fruit-heavy diet, right? Because it's an anti-obesogenic diet. So it's actually pretty difficult to gain excessive weight from fruit. And the thing is that with fruits, especially the fruits that I mentioned, these are mostly water anyway. And it's very difficult to get fat off water or something that's mostly water, right? Because it's not calorically dense enough to do it, right? It's not carb dense enough, it's just not. And these are very filling, okay? So basically when you have all of this water, carbs, and fiber and things like that, leptin kicks in and it's satiating to your appetite, all right? And then of course, if you feel hungry or you get like a little kind of, you're not necessarily hungry like your stomach's empty, but you could be a little bitish, right? Doesn't mean you necessarily have to eat, right? You could just have some green tea or something like that, right? But typically, if you're not that active, your metabolism is going to be kind of slow because you're not really moving around, right? So you're not going to really be burning through much fuel. So there isn't really going to be much of an appetite going on there. In some cases, it may be different on a case-by-case basis that would require more of a personalized touch. All right. Now, the average reasonable amount of weight loss is about 4 pounds of fat a month. All right, that's like average. That's pretty sustainable. Now you can take, like for example, train, feast, fast, where you train and eat big one day and then you fast the next, or you train one day, you eat moderately, and then you eat big the next day, and then you fast the following day after that, right? Train, feast, fast. And this is very effective for losing weight, having some type of fasting strategy. Implementing a fasting strategy is like the most beneficial way to actually get you to dropping the most amount of body fat you possibly can. However, probably going to be the most uncomfortable. All right. Whereas if you have a fruit-based diet, not really going to be that uncomfortable, right? Because you're not literally avoiding all forms of food. All right. So that's pretty much the deal with that. So all that vitamin C and vitamin E, antioxidants, B vitamins, potassium, all this kind of stuff, and just having all of your food choices being loaded with antioxidants, this is going to reduce the cellular breakdown in your body. So let's take, for example, mutated cells that cause hyperpigmentation, or acne, or weird blemishes and things on your face, rashes, etc., eczema, right, lupus, things of this nature. If you have an antioxidant-rich diet, all of this stuff really comes down along with the inflammation that you experience. So you get better quality skin. You get less wrinkles in your skin. You get fuller hair. You get better and quicker hair growth, right? You get stronger teeth. You get stronger bones, all this kind of stuff, right? Because there's always cellular breakdown happening. Cells are getting oxidized and damaged. They're dying off, and then your body has to replace them. What we know as aging is really just more cells are dying than new cells coming in, right? So let's say this is your level of old and damaged cells that are dying, and then this is your level of new cells. If there's more dying cells than new cells, this will look like more wrinkles in your face. This will look like more inflammation, joint pain, muscle and bone loss, right? This can be even things like kidney disease, fatty liver disease. This can be cancer, things like this, right? Now, if you have low levels of oxidation, therefore you have less cellular breakdown and you have more cellular growth, you're in the positive. This is where youth kicks in. This is how you maintain your vitality. This is how you reverse aging, so to speak, right? Because you don't get all of this cellular breakdown where you just don't have everything just breaking down on you, right? And so this is how people will maintain clear, smooth skin, strong bones, energy, bright eyes, all this type of stuff, right? That's how that works. So that's a big advantage, okay? You have a hydrating diet that's loaded with antioxidants and provides you the perfect amount of fuel to be able to power your body, okay? Your brain is a glucose burning machine. Your brain uses like 25%, 20 to 25% of all the glucose you consume, of all the sugar you consume, right? So your brain is a powerful machine that is constantly just sucking up glucose. Right? So definitely it's important to feed your brain. And something like a fruit-based diet where you eat in abundance is a great way to do that. Right? Did I cover it? Did I answer a lot of questions, folks? Was that a satiating response and explanation there? Was that a satiating breakdown, folks? Put an S in the chat if that really clarified things up for you. Right? The S is the signature of approval from the chat. There we go. We got some S's in here. There's a couple of y'all who haven't hit that like button, right? If y'all do me a solid, if I deserve it, if that breakdown deserved a like, definitely, pass that on. It'd be much appreciated, y'all. And of course, if you got any questions too, we can do a Q&A as well. We can get into that. I don't want to keep y'all up all night, so we're gonna see how we do in time. We still got to get to this this video breakdown. Let's see. All right. That's right. See all them S's. Yeah. Definitely did. DG. All right. Solid. I don't see any comments about protein powder. But I'll talk a little bit about protein powder. Yep, everything that I named in the smoothie, the moringa leaf, the cacao powder, the plant-based milk, the Ceylon cinnamon, all that go in the smoothie. All of that goes in the smoothie. All right, are we ready to move on to the video review? We got to talk about heart health, right? We got to talk about that, folks. We got to talk about what is my man saying about these 10 foods. Should we be alarmed? Right? Put a 1 in the chat if y'all ready for me to move on to that. Getting the 1s popping up. Yeah, all right. So we're gonna move on. Y'all gave me the green light here. I'm gonna do a test play of the video. Okay. Just to see how my sound comes through, if y'all can hear it clearly.
Hello, health champions. Today I'm going to talk about the top 10 foods that destroy your heart. And that's
all right, put a 1 in the chat. Matter of fact, now, put a W in the chat if y'all can hear that clearly. Yeah, put a W in the chat if y'all can hear that clearly. And let me know if it's too loud, if it's too low, y'all want me to turn it up or turn it down. I want it to be around as loud as me. I don't want it to be too much louder than me though. You know what I'm saying? I don't want them shouting over me. So let me know. All right, y'all. So we got some W's in the chat. Look at that. No streaming hiccups tonight. We're going smooth tonight. Look at that. See, we get some pro quality streaming. One-man band here. Look at that. All right, y'all. Perfect volume. There we go. Let me tell you something. I learned a lot about audio production, okay? For broadcast. So, all right. So let me rewind it back. We're going to see what my man talking about here.
Hello, health champions. Today I'm going to talk about the top 10 foods that destroy your heart. And that's super important to understand because cardiovascular disease is the #1 killer of people in the world. 18 million people a year die globally from this, which is twice as many as the #2 problem, which is cancer. And that number includes both heart attacks and strokes. So we could have a problem where the heart doesn't get enough oxygen and we get a myocardial infarction, but it could also be a clot in the brain or a bleed in the brain called a stroke. So both of those would be included in the cardiovascular disease. And there's very little disagreement on the fact that cardiovascular disease is caused by food. It's our lifestyles, it's the way that we eat that causes most of those problems. And yet, we can't agree on which foods cause the problems. So that's what we're going to talk about, and we're going to understand.
All right, so one thing that's really important to keep in mind, too, what he brought up is a lack of oxygen. It's going to be very important to talk about that lack of oxygen, right? Because I haven't watched this thing all the way through. And the video doesn't appear to be too long here, so is it too long? I don't know. Well, long enough. But so he mentioned a lack of oxygen, and this is going to become very important. And I might pull up some interesting studies kind of just to support some of the things that I'm going to say here. But one thing that's very important to notice is people who do these kinds of videos, if what someone is saying is legit, the longer they talk, if what they're saying is legit, there should be a consistency where they shouldn't be. So for example, let's say you do, this guy, he does a 30-minute video. Now, if he says something 5 minutes in, but then 10 minutes later, he's saying something that contradicted the thing that he said in the beginning, then chances are he's not really too well sorted out in what he's saying. I'm not saying that that's what he did here, right? No spoilers. But that's a thing you want to keep in mind, right? It's kind of like if someone's lying to you, keep them talking, because the longer they talk, they're going to trip themselves up, right? So this is like a media literacy thing, right? I'm not accusing him of lying or anything like that. I'm not doing that. I'm just saying that's a good thing to watch out for, because, you know, people put out a lot of information in the internet and all this type of stuff. People make all kind of claims. That's a good thing to listen out for.
Understand that really clearly. So it's important you follow through on all of this so you understand the mechanisms, because otherwise you will just fall in the trap of believing the next list or the next person who claims something. Because if you do a Google search and you look up, which I did, foods that cause heart disease, then what you're going to find is out of 759 million results, The number one results at the top of the page, which was not a paid ad, was Better Health Channel. I think it was in Australia or something, but it doesn't really matter because they all say the same thing. And they say saturated fat is bad. It causes heart disease. And it does.
So saturated fat causes heart disease. It's the number one thing you see here, all right? But he's admitting this up front. This is the thing that I often say, which is the reason why I'm such a big fan of a high-carb diet. And typically, people who have heart disease and things like that, when I write them a diet plan, dietary fats are fairly low, especially the saturated fat, okay? Even if I write a diet plan where the dietary fats are around 25 or maybe even close to 30%, the saturated fat is a tiny sliver of that, right? It's usually not beyond more than 4% of that. All right. So, but he's admitting that up front about the saturated fat. Okay, so let's keep it going here.
Does that because it raises LDL cholesterol, which is a bad cholesterol that causes heart disease. And we want to start understanding that that is not how it works. That was a truth, a myth established 50, 60, 70 years ago that still stays with us, even though the evidence is very, very clear that this is not how it works, that people who eat.
So what he's doing at this point, so this is a straw man, what he's saying, because he's making up an argument that the science does not demonstrate. I don't know who even makes this claim. Saturated fat is bad because it raises your LDL. That's not the claim. Now, there is a very strong correlation between increased saturated fat and an increase in LDL, right? But that's not the sole reason why saturated fat is problematic. So this kind of argument, maybe he's just misconstruing what the argument is that people make, but I'm going to dive into it a little bit more because I would agree with him. It's not that simple. It's a bit more complicated than that as far as saturated fat, right? So I'm going to go a little deep into explaining why that is, but I don't know how far he goes here. So let's see.
Good quality saturated fat actually live longer. They don't get heart disease. It's actually the way to reverse heart disease. The mantra that we hear over and over is to avoid animal.
Okay, so basically that's his first false claim. There is no scientific evidence that shows that the consumption of more saturated fat reverses heart disease. That's not true. In fact, the available data confirms that lowering saturated fat and replacing it specifically with polyunsaturated fat sources and monounsaturated fat sources reverses heart disease. All right? So there have been studies that tested saturated fat versus poly and monounsaturated fat. And the studies and the data shows that polyunsaturated fat and monounsaturated fat reverse heart disease and improve cardiovascular health, whereas saturated fat makes it worse, okay? And they also highlighted the fact that polyunsaturated fats are actually more beneficial with heart disease patients than monounsaturated fat sources. All right, so that claim he's making, that's not a true claim. All right, so that's incorrect.
Animal products such as butter, coconut oil, and lard. We should not eat beef, lamb, eggs, or bacon. And all the dairy products should be non-fat or low-fat, is what they tell us. And that is the problem. So we need to understand what the mechanisms are instead. And then they throw in pastries and biscuits down at the end, kind of like an afterthought. And they don't realize that these two things don't belong in the same category, that the animal products are stable saturated fats that are good for you, whereas the pastries are actually...
Now keep in mind, when he says things like good fats, people use the term good fats, but they never really explain what that means. Like good saturated fat sources. We don't really know what that means, right? So, things like this, people use terms like grass-fed or good quality sources. And then people also use the term processed foods. First of all animal products have to be processed in order for them to be edible. Right? So, for example, eggs. Nobody's sitting here cracking and eating raw eggs. When you cook an egg, it becomes processed. The moment you remove the shell, it becomes processed. You take meat and you drain the blood and you remove the fur and all of that type of stuff, it becomes processed by definition. Because a processed food essentially is a food where you change the fundamental molecular structure of the food and remove parts from the food itself, now making it a more partial an extremely different version of that food. All right, so by definition, it's processed. All right, so let's listen to this, hear what he says.
Really bad because the fat there is primarily a vegetable fat that they have hardened and turned partially saturated through a process.
Wrong. So when they're talking about biscuits and pastries, what he just explained was trans fats. Trans fats were officially made illegal in the United States. All right. Now, also, if you've been vegan for any amount of time and you wanted to buy vegan pastries, you come to find out it's actually very difficult to get vegan pastries because they put dairy in all the pastries and all the biscuits. Okay. And if you look at the amount of dietary fat that is in pastries typically, pastries have a tremendous amount of dietary fat in them. They can be upwards of around 20 to 35% dietary fat. And a lot of it is eggs, butter, milk. Those are the key ingredients. And if you've ever made a cake or biscuits in the conventional way, you've used eggs, butter, and milk. So he probably hasn't made any pastries before or really read the labels. So he doesn't actually know how these things are made. So that's also an incorrect claim that he's making. All right, let's move on.
Process called partially hydrogenated. And that turns a fat, the vegetable fat that was processed and bad to start with, turns it very, very toxic. That creates all sorts of problems. But that's not even the only problem with pastries and biscuits, because they also contain sugar and preservatives and modern wheat and other grains and starches. So throwing that into a list, we often see these different categories of foods that they just mix them together haphazardly without understanding anything about why they would have anything to do with heart disease. So let's understand the real cause of heart disease once and for all. And we'll go backwards. So we start with cardiovascular disease and we'll work our way up. And cardiovascular disease is caused by damaged blood vessels. So vascular disease means just that, vascular vessels. And
so now the key thing to talk about, we're going to see how far he dives into what damages the blood vessels. By the way, now if he's going to be accurate about this, he's going to talk about the endothelium, which is the inner layer of your blood vessels, right? So he's implying endothelial damage. Okay, now endothelial damage is done by oxidative stress and metabolite buildup. The most common ones that become a problem with damage to the endothelium is free radicals, reactive oxygen species, right, metabolites that actually damage the cells of the endothelium. And then that damage then gets patched up by lipoproteins or cholesterol in combination with calcium. Let's see if he explains that dynamic.
And when they get damaged, that's when we experience the heart disease. If we get little cracks and damage on the inside, then body repairs it and we get sometimes these atherosclerotic plaques and calcifications.
Okay, so he did kind of get into that. Calcification meaning calcium buildup, atherosclerotic plaque made from cholesterol, lipoproteins, in combination with calcium.
If we get a bunch of blood clots, then they can dislodge and flow into the brain and cause a stroke. So what then causes the damage? And the answer is there's two things. There's two things that initiate, that actually causes the damage, and that is inflammation and oxidative stress. That's the end tool that inflicts the damage, if you will. So then the question is,
the restrooms are a mile away.
Ad alert.
Really? This your plan for movie night? Yeah, I got rid of our cable.
is of course working.
All right, so he's talking about inflammation and oxidative stress as if they're two different things. So the oxidative stress comes first and the body responds with inflammation. Okay, inflammation is your body's response to oxidative stress. So we're going to see if he talks about what causes the oxidative stress, what makes it as prevalent as it is. Let's see if he gets into that.
Working our way up here, what causes inflammation and oxidative stress? Which foods do that? And the number one mechanism, the number one adaptation in the body that causes these problems is called insulin resistance. And it causes both inflammation and oxidative stress. And it's the number one problem for the vast majority of people. But it's not the only problem, because you can get heart disease without having insulin resistance, even though it is the cause in most cases. And if you don't have insulin resistance, then it could be something like toxins, it could be stress, or it could be bad fats. And we're going to talk about what.
All right, so basically, when he says toxins, right, so this is kind of a broad umbrella term that he's creating here. So oils could be grouped under toxins. It depends on how those oils are processed and whether or not if they're pre-oxidized or not. Stress, well, stress goes back to what he mentioned before, which is oxidative stress. So it's kind of redundant to say stress because scientifically, stress and oxidative stress are the same thing, right? So really, when we talk about toxins, the most prevalent ones that cause heart disease is going to be an accumulation of metabolites, right? Reactive oxygen species, free radicals, those types of things, right? Which are basically, this can be the byproducts of harmful bacteria. This could be the byproducts of medications and the metabolites that are produced from medications. This could be the metabolites that result from cooking oils or fats past their smoke point, especially when you do it over a prolonged period of time. They become more rancid and they become more oxidized. And so then they release more metabolites into your body, which then cause oxidative damage and then signal inflammation. All right, so he's going to now talk about bad fats. So let's see what he means about that.
What those are. Fat is not bad. There are good fats and there are bad fats. And the number one problem with insulin resistance is sugar, and also to a large extent these processed oils, which will explain why they are bad and which ones they are.
All right, so he's skipping a vital point here, okay? So when he says sugars are a vital problem with insulin resistance, if I'm going to be charitable, I'm saying that he's intentionally choosing his words very carefully, because sugar does not cause insulin resistance, right? So that would actually be a false claim if he were to say that. So he says with insulin resistance, which I guess, but the substrate for insulin resistance is saturated fat intake, and there's data and studies on that, and I can pull that up also. And I'll make sure to do that further on down the line in the stream. I've talked about saturated fat, but I can also pull up scientific data and studies that clearly show, and there's been, structured diets and control groups and whatnot. And so they've done this and replicated this multiple times where it's pretty clear that saturated fat produces insulin resistance. Right? So he skipped over that and he went straight to sugar because, of course, he's a big advocate for, greasy, fatty foods that come from animal products. I guess he's a real big fan of eating things with parents. But all right, let's move on here.
If we know that this is the sequence, this is the causation, and we know that the inflammation and the oxidative stress, those are the things that execute, that inflict the damage, we can't talk about the foods without paying attention to this sequence of causation. And insulin resistance.
So that's not the sequence of causation. All right, so he skipped a lot of, so this that he's lining up out here is not the sequence of causation. The reason why is because he's putting insulin resistance ahead of what causes insulin resistance. So he conveniently skipped over that. All right, so that's literally not the sequence. And he also didn't touch on calcium either. So he skipped over a lot of things. So this isn't really the sequence of how this works.
Resistance is an adaptation. It is not a disease, it's not a state, it's an adaptation. It's a temporary state that the body develops based on our lifestyle when we change.
Well, by definition, it is a disease. It's a dis-ease of the body. So by definition, it is a disease.
Change the lifestyle, the adaptation changes. So insulin resistance, which is basically the same thing as advanced insulin resistance, is type 2 diabetes, is almost completely reversible in almost all cases. And if we can reverse the insulin resistance, then we can also reverse the diabetes, but then we have to avoid the foods that actually cause it. So up at the top row here, we have the actual causes of cardiovascular disease, because this is a sequence of causation. Food number 2.
So he skipped over what caused insulin resistance. So if you're going to talk about if you're going to start with cardiovascular disease, and then up from that, you're going to go to stress and oxidative stress, and then to skip oxidative stress and go to insulin resistance. Well, you just skip what causes the oxidative stress, right? So he talked about inflammation, oxidative stress. Well, what causes the inflammation and oxidative stress? He didn't touch on that, right? So if you just skip over that and then you're going to go to insulin resistance, then you don't talk about what causes insulin resistance when you skip over that. So he skipped a lot of things, and now he's going to go straight to sugar. This is kind of bizarre why you would do that, because he's skipping a tremendous amount of things. There's a ton of nuance that he's skipping when he does this. So he's going to start with number 10, which is rice. Okay, all right, so let's see what we got here.
10 is rice. And it's not as bad as some of the other foods we're going to talk about, but it can still be a problem, and here is why. So we need to understand what glucose and carbohydrates are. When we talk about carbohydrates, it's plant food that we eat that gets picked apart and we absorb it into the bloodstream as glucose. It's called blood sugar or blood glucose. And that's a 6-carbon ring that is called glucose. Now, that's a monosaccharide, and all plants are made up mostly of glucose. When we eat something sweet, then it is usually a table sugar. It's a disaccharide. And if we have glucose on the one side and fructose on the other, we have a 6-carbon ring and a 5-carbon ring. That is called sucrose, or table sugar. So this side of it is the same thing, and then depending on which
Now, understand what he's doing right here. This is called obfuscation. This is where you load up your argument with a lot of extra details that you don't necessarily need to make your point. Right? A lot of this is fluff. He doesn't need to do this in order to make his point. Now, if he's going to skip all the stuff that causes the oxidative stress and skip the things that cause the insulin resistance, it's convenient for him to do that, because if he's actually researched this, then he knows it's saturated fat. And being that he can't say that, I guess because his brand is all about eating saturated fat, he can't be honest about that. So he's got to skip that whole thing entirely, and he's got to go straight to carbs, right? Because he's a big fan of eating, I guess, lard, butter, and cheeseburgers. So he can't say that, right? So he's got to be like, eggs, and cheese, and butter, and bacon, and sausage, and all the stuff that Americans typically eat and have extreme levels of heart disease. Well, it's not those things that's giving you the heart disease. It's not the bacon and the sausage and the red meat and the burgers. You know, all the things that are in the clinical trials that are proven to contribute to heart disease. You know, all the stuff that, you know, the American Heart Association, the American Diabetes Association, all the clinical peer-reviewed trials are all saying it's causing the heart disease. Dr. Sten Ekberg is going to tell you, well, they're all wrong. And you should listen to Dr. Sten Ekberg because he's a doctor. Interestingly enough, what is he a doctor of? He's a chiropractor, not a nutritionist. All right? But he's going to teach us the nuances of the molecular structure of, I guess, rice and fruit for some reason. They're okay.
Saccharide it is, then this one will change up. They could be different things. And here's the part that most people miss, because they say that sugar is bad, but complex carbs are good. And here's what they don't understand, that they are exactly the same thing. That if we take this glucose and we start chaining it together, then it becomes long, long chains, and they're called starch. That is what we find in rice, potatoes, and grains, etc. When the body stores carbohydrate, then we chain them up a little bit different, and it's called glycogen, but it's the same stuff. Even wood and fiber is still made up of glucose, except it's just configured a little differently, so in some cases we can't break it down. So now that you understand this once and for all, that virtually all carbohydrates are glucose that becomes blood glucose, now you can see that starch is 100% glucose, and therefore it will raise blood sugar, and therefore it will also raise insulin. So anytime.
So basically what he did was he went through all of this disaccharides, monosaccharides, starch, fiber, glucose, glycogen, and then he hand waved all of it and said all of that's irrelevant because it all just breaks down into glucose, which is just sugar that raises your insulin. So this is what I mean about the obfuscation. So he just fed you a bunch of information that didn't even really matter because he was just going to hand wave all of it anyway. And so now him hand waving all of the nuance, he now no longer has to talk about the glycemic index. All right? So this is how this works, because remember, he's a big fan of having a fatty, sweaty, meaty, greasy diet, right? A nice gassy, fungusy diet, right? Loaded up with all kind of dairy and eggs and grease and bacon and sausage, right? So he's not allowed to talk about the glycemic index because now he's going to have to be honest about the fact that not all carbs are going to spike your blood sugar like crazy. Then he's going to have to talk about whole foods and processed foods and how they register on the glycemic index. And that matters because when you look at your actual blood sugar levels, how high they spike, whether or not if that high blood sugar level is maintained, he's going to have to talk about glycemic index. He's going to have to talk about glycemic load because all of these things are directly relevant to your blood sugar level. All right. But being that he's going to tell you to just avoid carbs altogether, this is just more stuff that he's not able to talk about because it goes against his brand. All right? Not trying to smear the guy or anything, but let's just be honest, right? That's what that is. If you can hand wave all of the nuances of starch, glucose, fructose, the glycogen, if you could just hand wave all that, well, now you don't need to talk about glycemic index and glycemic load. You don't need to talk about, well, what is the relevance of these things? Like glycemic index, if you're a diabetic, it is a good idea for all of your carb sources to come from foods that are 55 and below on the glycemic index, okay? Or at least 80 to 90% of your foods should come from foods that are 55 and below on the glycemic index. There's exceptions, right? Like You can have a food that is a 70 or maybe even an 80 on the glycemic index, but it has a low glycemic load. Watermelon is a good example of this. Because even though it's a bit higher on the glycemic index and it's more in the mid-range, because it has a glycemic load, it doesn't really spike your glucose that high, right? Because the load isn't high enough. It's not calorically dense enough, right? So there's not as many grams of carbohydrates in it. Because watermelon, for example, is like 90% water. He's not allowed to talk about any of these things because it's not going to be great for his brand. Okay? So if you keep your foods, at a food that's at a rate that's like a 55 and below on the glycemic index, this is one way of controlling your blood sugar while still being able to eat carbohydrates. Right? Now, any nutritionist who understands diabetics, insulin resistance, understands glycemic index, glycemic load, insulin sensitivity, and the micronutrients that actually improve insulin sensitivity, well, they'll be able to explain these things to you, and they don't have to worry about trying to preserve some kind of brand where they have to keep this information from people. And I'm probably maybe that sounds a bit uncharitable. I don't know, y'all tell me if I'm bringing up a brand or whatever, but this is a guy, he has a YouTube channel. He stakes his brand on, eating, I ate 10 sticks of butter for 2 weeks. I ate nothing but cheeseburgers without the bun for 2 weeks, this kind of things, right? So this is what I mean by brand. I'm not just throwing that around for no reason. And also a reason why I say brand is because all of his videos are mostly just about nutrition. And he calls himself Dr. Sten Ekberg, but he's a chiropractor, but all of his content is about having a fatty diet, which is kind of weird because that has nothing to do with spinal alignment or back cracking, right? So why wouldn't you talk about the thing that you have a degree in? It's kind of odd. But let's move on.
That we raise blood sugar. The blood sugar cannot get into the cell where it needs to perform work and turn into energy until insulin helps it through the gate, so to speak. So whenever blood sugar goes up, the body responds with insulin. It's a beautiful mechanism. It works beautifully unless we start using excess carbohydrate. If we eat some now and then and seasonally, then it's not a problem. The system balances itself. But when we eat carbohydrate as the foundation of our diet, and we eat it 365 days a year, all day long, now it becomes a problem. It becomes too much. And the system becomes overwhelmed, and we kind of clog up the system, if you will.
So it's kind of irresponsible for him to make that claim, because people like me and other tribe members are living proof that that's not true. So I've literally had diabetics where we put them on a carbohydrate dominant diet where their diet is like 65 to 70% carbs, and that ends up reversing their type 2 diabetes and improving their insulin resistance and lowering their blood sugar to a healthy level and decongesting their liver all year round. So what he's saying is categorically false. There's no evidence for it whatsoever. So it's a bit negligent for him to say that. There's no evidence for it, right? Now, if he's going to say, well, the problem is eating too much. Well, how much is too much? So you can point out math, right? So if somebody was to ask me, hey, how much saturated fat is too much? My answer would be, your saturated fat is too much when your overall dietary fat on a daily basis is over 30%, and saturated fat makes up more than 15% of that. So I can give you numbers based on scientific data, if I wanted to say that, right? So I can give numbers. So if somebody was to ask me for the numbers, I can give the numbers. Because if I'm going to say too much or too little or whatever, the next rational question is, well, how much is how much? Or how much is too much? Right? Be specific. So when you say seasonally here and there, these are not numbers. That doesn't mean anything, right? All right, so let's go. Let's move on here. It's very interesting stuff. Very interesting. I love doing these video reviews.
And we develop insulin resistance. So the question I always get is, well, how
By the way, he says, and we develop insulin resistance. There's no scientific evidence that shows that eating carbohydrates year-round leads to insulin resistance. There's no scientific evidence for that whatsoever. That's a false claim.
Asia could eat rice for all those years. And the reason they could do that was that historically, there was not an abundance of food. They ate their rice, but they didn't eat all the processed food in addition. They were physically active. They had physical labor most of the day. They ate 2 or 3 meals per day, not 6 meals. They didn't have soft drinks and Coca-Cola to sip on all day long. And they had no processed foods.
So he's changing the argument because, see, he just debunked himself. Before, he said, oh, you eat an abundance of carbohydrates year-round, it's going to lead to insulin resistance. Now he debunks himself by bringing up a group of people that are contradictory to what he just said. So now he has to start splaining, right? So he's got to say, well, you know, they engage in physical labor and they only eat 3 meals a day as opposed to 6. Most people only eat 3 meals a day. I mostly work with people struggling against obesity, and they only eat like 2 or 3 times a day, sometimes just once a day. Almost every single obese person eats less than me, way less than me. Okay, especially obese people who are trying to lose weight. You have people, most people, almost everyone that I talk to who is over 250 pounds, they're not eating more than 1,800 calories a day. All right, especially the ones trying to lose weight. I do coaching calls, consultation calls. People can sign up for a call and book a call with me right now and put themselves on my schedule. All right, and so I have this open every week where people can put themselves on my, so I talk to people on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, so I know what people eat. I've come to learn what dietary habits people typically have. So I know when someone's talking and they're describing what they think people's diet is, I know they don't talk to these people. They don't engage in the work in nutrition. They don't do the consultations. So they have no idea. Most people don't eat 6 meals a day. People come to me and they want a diet plan or whatever. If I was to make them a diet plan with 6 meals, they'd be like, I could barely even eat 3 meals. Sometimes I mostly eat 2. I don't even know if I have the time to even prep 6 meals. 6 meals is a lot. Most people don't eat 6 meals, especially people who work full-time jobs and even work overtime. They do not logistically have the time to eat 6 separate meals. Right? Maybe he has the free time to do it. Most working class people do not. All right. And then he says no processed foods. So number 1, all animal products that you eat are processed foods. All right. So then he has to start explaining, and he says sipping on soda and soft drinks. Now he's pivoting to soda and soft drinks, which is a thing we all agree leads to poor health outcomes, right? But that has nothing to do with carbohydrates. It's an entirely different thing at that point. So let's move on here.
Processed foods contains a lot of grain and a lot of sugar and a lot of chemicals. So if you eat the rice...
Processed foods also contains a lot of saturated fat. You notice he left that out? Go to any grocery store and just go down an aisle with all foods with boxes and bags and look at the amount of saturated fat in each serving of any processed food that you pick up off the shelf and tell me what you see. So he said grains and all this, and he conveniently left out saturated fat, right? So just pay attention to these things. He's deliberately choosing to leave that out, right? So he's being very selective, right?
By itself, and that's all you eat or very little else, there's no abundance, then your body can tolerate it. But once you start eating the rice plus the processed foods, now it becomes a problem. And once you have become insulin resistant, once you have already clogged up your body, now rice becomes a bad thing because it keeps you from reversing it. And I want to mention one more thing about what we just talked about relating to carbohydrates, because a lot of people know that white sugar is bad, and a lot of people have heard that high fructose corn syrup is bad, so they say I'll avoid those two. But there is really no difference to all the other kinds of sugar. So whether we call it brown sugar or light brown sugar or powdered sugar, agave or honey or dextrose or grape sugar or molasses or glucose syrup, It is all the same stuff. It is.
So it is literally not all the same stuff, right? So for example, glucose goes directly to the cells of your body. Fructose exclusively goes to your liver to then be converted into usable forms of glucose later on. So when he says they're all the same thing, they are not fundamentally the same thing, functionally the same thing, or molecularly the same thing, right? So that's just a wildly false statement. I don't even know why he would say that. That seems a bit like an over-the-top claim.
Different combinations and ratios of glucose and fructose. That's all it is. So it's still going to affect your blood sugar the same way. It's still going to create insulin resistance, and it's going to prevent the reversal. And then people go, okay, I get it. I understand that. Those are not so great. But of course, fruit is still fantastic, right? We need to eat more fruits and vegetables, right? Actually, no. And fruit, it's not a bad thing unless you have already developed insulin resistance and poor metabolic health.
There's no evidence for that whatsoever, right? And I can show the scientific evidence for that a little bit later on. But you know, I have tribe members that will attest to that. I mean, there's clinical research and statistical data and whatnot that would show that that's not true. So these are like wild claims that he's making. By the way, he didn't leave any citations for any of that supports any of these claims that he's making, by the way. So this is a chiropractor telling you all of this type of stuff, just to keep in mind, right? So that doesn't really help.
So most people can have some fruit, but if you're trying to reverse a disease condition, the sugar in fruit is exactly this. It's different ratios of glucose and fructose. There is no different. The body doesn't metabolize it any differently. Fruit is better than candy bars because it has more water, it has some fiber, and it's processed a little differently in terms of speed, but the sugar and the insulin required is exactly the same. So if you're metabolically healthy, enjoy some fruit. If you're diabetic, then
the insulin required is not the same, actually. So insulin release, first of all, fructose is not insulinogenic. Okay, so fructose goes straight to your liver. It doesn't spike your blood sugar. This is the reason why the forms of sugar that are the lowest on the glycemic index are the ones that are the highest in fructose. For example, agave nectar or coconut sugar, right? One of the biggest differences, the reason why fruits are typically low on the glycemic index is because they're split 50-50 between glucose and fructose. So the glycemic load is cut in half on average because of the molecular structure of the carbohydrates in fruit. Your body doesn't need the insulin necessarily for the fructose, it needs it for the glucose. Right? So when he says it requires the same amount of insulin, no, it doesn't. Okay? So he's making a lot of false claims here. But I'll cut him some slack with making claims like this because this isn't his wheelhouse, because he's a chiropractor.
And cut it down to a bare minimum. You can still have some berries here and there, but I would avoid fruit and definitely.
Now notice he's not giving any numbers. You can eat some fruit sometimes, just a smidgen, you know, here and there. He's not giving any numbers. So if you want to know, if you have a metabolic disorder, which like 1 in 3 people have a metabolic disorder, if you want to know how much fruit to eat, well, this is not going to be very helpful, because what does here and there mean? What does that mean? Right? How many berries? What's a serving? How often? There's no specifics. Right? So this is not going to be helpful. Now, before we go further, because this video is kind of long, but in the beginning, he started cardiovascular damage, and what did he say? Oxidative stress, inflammation. All right? Fruits, what are fruits particularly loaded up with? Antioxidants. And what do antioxidants do? they dramatically and significantly reduce oxidative stress and therefore reduce inflammation. So going back to what he said in the very beginning of this video, that's going to contradict everything he's saying now. So now when you inject glycemic index, glycemic load, and the antioxidant compounds inside fruits, this is now contradicting what he said earlier. This is why I said, when these guys, just the longer they talk, they eventually end up undermining stuff they said earlier. This is the media literacy thing that I was talking about to really pay attention to. It's just a matter of time. If they talk long enough, they're going to undermine themselves because they're going to say something that directly contradicts something they said earlier. All right?
Don't buy in to the slogan of eating more fruits and vegetables, more fruits and vegetables. You eat more vegetables and less fruit. And like we said, starch is 100% sugar. It breaks down into glucose. And that includes things like rice and potato and beans. They have some other things in there, but they're very high in carbohydrate.
They have some other things in there like what? You think he's going to get into that? Now, mind you, endothelial damage, right? The damage to the blood vessels that he mentioned earlier. What is that a result of? Oxidative stress. Now, what do the beans have in them? Because do those beans have antioxidants? Are those beans low in the glycemic index? So he's not going to talk about micronutrients at all. So he's not going to talk about potassium, magnesium, vitamin C. He's not going to talk about citrulline. He's not going to talk about glutamine. He's not going to talk about any of these things. He's not going to talk about the hydration levels and how hydration levels affect cardiovascular health. Because literally insulin resistance, one of the major factors in insulin resistance is dehydration. So blood pressure, oxidative stress, and insulin resistance literally increase with chronic dehydration. All right, so you see, I'm giving you a more nuanced take than what he's giving you. He's showing you, oh, just fats, carbohydrates, that's it. He's being very selective. I can talk about everything straight across the board. Because I haven't staked my brand on this very narrow thing of just eating burgers and butter. Right? Just talk about the nutrition as it is. Talk about calories, carbs, fats, proteins, vitamins, minerals, amino acids, polyphenols, tannins, all. Talk about all of it. Don't be selective and want to boil things down and oversimplify things in order to paint a narrative where you got to do all of this, you got to omit a whole bunch of other stuff. That's not helpful to people who are coming to you for help. Right? So this is a bit negligent, but I don't think it's necessarily malicious on his part. He just doesn't know any better because he's a chiropractor. All right, so I would go to him for back cracking because he's a doctor of chiropractic. All right, so I would go to him for that. Right, if my back feeling a little lopsided or something like that, I slept wrong or something like that, I'd be going to see him. For a diet plan, no, not necessarily.
Corn is very high. That's why they make cornstarch from it. And tapioca and sorghum are also different forms of starch. So a lot of people think that, yeah, I don't eat the grain. I heard that gluten and wheat is bad, so I eat gluten-free pizza and I eat gluten-free bread and so forth. Well, you're still eating 100% sugar in the starch that they substitute. So they often put in rice flour or tapioca or sorghum, but it's still all starch. So don't fall for that. Food number 9 is bread. And all the things we talked about for rice holds true for bread, but this one is a little worse. The starch is the same, the insulin is the same, but the allergies are much, much more common with bread and with wheat and with gluten. And a lot of
Yo, I cannot believe these shorts from Fabletics are 2 for $24. Look at the shorts I used to wear to the gym.
People having trouble with gut health is because of allergies to bread and to gluten. So even if you don't test.
Well, people are not allergic to bread and gluten, right? People are mainly allergic to either the dairy inside the bread or they're allergic to the gluten inside the bread. Now, gluten, I don't know if he's going to explain this, but gluten is an adhesive, right? So it holds, it's like a gum, all right? It's like this, it's a type of protein that acts as a gum. It holds bread together, right? So if you ever gotten like gluten-free bread, it's kind of chalky, it falls apart in your hands. It's not chewy or anything like that. It's like it's crusty and it doesn't hold together well. If you've ever tried to bake like gluten-free cookies or something like that, you know what I'm talking about. Gluten is meant to hold it together, right? Also, then you get into things like yeast, right? People may have reactions to yeast that is put in making bread, right? To make bread rise and these different types of things. And then if people are putting certain chemicals, colorings, or preservatives inside the bread, then that would be an irritant to your gut lining on top of the gluten, because gluten can build up on your gut lining. And they build up on the walls of your intestines, and they can actually impede digestion over time. This is one of the problems with gluten. All right? And gluten has to be checked by fiber. If you have a substantial amount of gluten in your diet and a lack of fiber, this now practically guarantees the accumulation of gluten on your intestinal walls and built up in your colon. All right, so just giving you the full picture about that here, just in case he doesn't cover it. He very well may not know, because he's a chiropractor.
As allergic to gluten, you might want to cut it out and just see what happens to these things. And if you have allergies, if you have poor gut health, that creates inflammation, that contributes to cardiovascular disease. Food number 8 that causes heart disease is alcohol. And why would that be? Well, alcohol is natural in small amounts.
I actually agree with him on this. Alcohol is actually one of the leading contributors to heart disease, like top 3. So he's actually correct with that. It's like saturated fat, alcohol, smoking. These are like top 3. So yeah, that's actually correct on his part. So it took him, I don't know why that's number 8. Dude, you think you think rice and fruit is worse than alcohol? Like, I don't know. This is top 10. Why would like alcohol not be like number 1 on this list? It's all the way down at number 8. That's insane. All right.
It is a natural substance. We have an enzyme called alcohol dehydrogenase that is a fit that we can break that down. So it's not a poison in that sense. However, when we have excess, then it overwhelms the liver, because the liver is the only place that can process and break down alcohol. So you put it in the body and it circulates and it affects every cell, but the liver is the only place that can break it down and get rid of it, to neutralize it, if you will. So a lot of things that are not necessarily toxic, they become bad when we have too much. So a glass of wine here and there is not a problem. A bottle of wine every day is a big problem. And when we overwhelm the liver, we create something called fatty liver. It used to be the most fatty liver was called alcoholic fatty liver disease. And now most fatty liver is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease caused by fructose. So if you remember,
he's really doing this. He's really saying that. This is so bringing up fatty liver disease is the poison pill for his brand. Because fatty liver disease is literally created with the accumulation of fat in your liver, specifically saturated fat. Because polyunsaturated fat does not accumulate like that in your liver. Because polyunsaturated fat sources are metabolized in a fundamentally different way, and most polyunsaturated fat sources, almost all of them entirely, come from plants, which are rich in fiber. All right? So the poison pill for his whole project is fatty liver disease, specifically NAFLD, also known as non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So he's bringing this up, and kind of weird. He says, and fatty liver disease is caused by fructose, which is a wild claim to make. It's actually pretty wild to make that. So his whole brand is carbs are bad in all forms, no matter what the food is, which is, I mean, which is pretty wild. I don't think anybody reputable would ever make a claim like that because it's too strong of a claim, right? So even if you were like a big carnivore or a keto guy, but like you actually like were licensed and you can be held liable for the things that you say, you wouldn't really be willing to say make certain claims because people can take you to court, right? So that's why you can't make claims like that. So these are very bold claims. Now, to give him credit, he gave a disclaimer in the description of the video saying not to take anything he says in this video as medical advice, right? So he's letting you know up front, don't listen to me, all right? So I think I could put a link to this video so you can read the disclaimer that he gives. So at least he's honest like that. Look, I'm saying a lot of stuff in this video, but don't take this stuff as, go talk to your doctor, don't listen to me. So, so kudos to him for at least giving that disclaimer there in the description of the video. All right.
Sucrose is half glucose. White table sugar is half glucose and half fructose. That fructose is very similar to alcohol in the sense that only the liver can process it. So a little bit is perfectly natural, like a few berries here and there, not a problem.
What do you mean like a few berries? Does he mean like 3 berries? So is it like, what if you eat 10 berries? Are you going to get fatty liver disease from berries? So if I was doing a live debate with him, I would press him on this conversation because I've asked people this before. How many berries specifically are too much? If I already eat berries on a daily basis and they all have fructose in them, how many berries would I be able to eat on a daily basis before I end up with fatty liver disease? How many berries specifically is too much on a daily basis? Give me a number. No one's ever been able to give me a number. And if we were to have a live debate, I'd ask him this. How much? How many grams? Give me a number. Because if you say a few, don't do the thing where you say a few or kind of, don't do that. Just give me a number. Because this isn't helpful. Because now, if you research berries, if you research benefits of blueberries, one of the benefits is weight loss, lowering blood pressure, improving cardiovascular health, reversing fatty liver disease. Berries does all this. These are like all benefits of berries. So when you have a chiropractor giving you nutritional advice on the internet, he's telling you, oh, just eat a few, don't eat too many, because fatty liver disease. It seems it's problematic, right? But I'm gonna give him a pass. I'm gonna assume he doesn't know any better because he's a chiropractor.
Excess of fructose and sugar in soda and candy and processed food. Now we overwhelm the liver and we create a...
He's going to group berries and candies and sodas and soft drinks. He's going to group all that into the same category. That's kind of odd. Right? Or it's just all the stuff with fructose in it. It doesn't even really matter what the food item is. It's just all of it is in the same basket. All right. Seems a bit oversimplified and negligent. But again, I'll give him a pass. Chiropractor.
Fatty liver. And once that liver is filled up with fat, it becomes very insulin resistant. And because the liver is kind of the metabolic hub, that fat spreads into the abdominal cavity and sets the tone for the rest of the body. So we become insulin resistant when we have a fatty liver. So if you want to enjoy a drink now and then, less is better. But if you do, then I would suggest to you that liquor, pure liquor, gin, vodka, whiskey, rum, cognac, etc., is the best one to do because it is...
So he's suggesting hard liquor with the highest concentrations of alcohol. Look, normally I would say I would give him a pass because he's a chiropractor. This is dangerous now. We're getting dangerous, right? Because if people are saying, "Ooh, my heart health, I got heart problems, I want to watch this video," and you say, you know, if you're going to drink alcohol, drink the strongest kind with the highest concentrations of alcohol. Wow. That's okay. Let's hear the reasoning for that. That's pretty crazy. But this has got to be one of the most extreme claims I've ever heard in my life. But okay, so alcohol, number 8 on the list. But if you're gonna do it, drink the strongest kind. Now, in the beginning of the video, okay, he mentioned, oh, what are some of the things that cause heart disease? It cause you to have heart attacks, right? What did he say? Lack of oxygen to the heart, right? Oxidative stress. Guess what's going to cause a lack of oxygen? Hard liquor. That's why you get drunk when you just drink a 4-ounce shot, right? Because that high concentration, and it's so strong, it burns going down. If you've ever drank hard liquor, you know what I'm talking about. Okay? And it burns on the, you know what that burning is? You know what that burning is? That burning is oxidative stress, tearing your liver up. That's what that is, okay? Literally, hard liquor is like that's literally the driver for alcoholic fatty liver. All right, so, I mean, this is a bold claim. By the way, he's talking about filling up the liver. Now, if you wanted to give some numbers, and I did a video about this and I put it on TikTok, if you wanted to give some numbers, the average weight of a human liver is 3 pounds, all right? 3 pounds. More than 10% of your weight in liver gets you fatty liver disease. So if you have if more than 10% of your weight of your liver is fat, you got fatty liver disease, okay? So basically that comes out to be 136 grams of fat in your liver. That's what that is. So numbers, again, with numbers. These are just fun facts. Just want to throw that out there, right? If you want to see that video, I did a video. I put it on my TikTok. I think I put it on my Instagram too. And it's called Fatty Liver Disease, or Facts About Fatty Liver, or You Should Know This About Your Liver, something like that. But chances are the title, you'll see it, is Fatty Liver. And it's like in yellow letters on my TikTok. If you want to see that, you can go ahead and check that out. And I give like the facts, like the numbers on fatty liver disease. But anyways.
It's distilled. It's evaporated. So it is basically sugar-free. Wine is fermented grapes, which have a lot of sugar.
So drink the hardest form of liquor with the highest alcohol concentration, because it doesn't have sugar in it. This is wildly myopic. This is almost kind of like if I wanted to do a joke and I wanted to like make a parody of somebody giving bad health advice, that's a claim I would make. To be funny, I wouldn't say that seriously. Like, oh, you got heart disease, you got some cardiovascular problems. Well, make sure that if you decide to drink, don't drink red wine or anything like that. Drink the strong stuff. That stuff that burns. Drink the flammable stuff. Drink the stuff that gets you drunk the quickest. All right, okay.
Sugar, but the yeast consume a lot of the sugar. So most of the sugar from the grapes are gone, and there's just a little bit left in the wine. So again, it's not a good thing that I recommend, but if you're going to have some, you might as well not have the worst. So a little bit worse.
Okay, I'm not recommending it as a good thing, but I'm recommending it as not being the worst, which by the way, it is the worst. But all right.
Then wine is beer, because beer has a lot of carbohydrate. It's made from grain and malt. And the worst would be mixed drinks, because now you get the alcohol from the drink, but you also add a bunch of sugar. So now you have two things.
This dude has a real hate boner for sugar and carbs. It's like this is the root of all evil, like carbs. Like, why is our government so corrupt? They're eating carbs. Like it doesn't matter. His answer is the same no matter what he's talking about. It's incredible.
Things that only the liver can process. It's like you're giving it a double load or more compared to the liquor. And I would say that sugar is probably even worse than alcohol, because alcohol, you know when you consume too much.
This is going on kind of long. Let's see. What else? Because he's spending a lot of time on the alcohol thing. But let's see. Let's see if we skip ahead a little bit.
You don't know that. 50 years ago.
1 scoop of AG.
All right. So so I got it up. This is number 8, but he started from number 10 and he's going down to number 1.
Right. Replaces multiple supplements with 75 high quality.
I don't want to go on too long with this. This is kind of, I mean, seems to be kind of long. We're only like halfway through, so let me see here. Matter of fact, folks, let's bring some democracy in here. Let's bring some democracy in the chat here. All right. I don't want to do a whole lot here. Put a 1 in the chat if you want me to continue, if you want me to go through the full video or you've seen enough. Put a 2 in the chat. Well, put a 1 if you want me to continue covering the video, and put a 2 in the chat if you've just heard enough and you want me to stop. Let's see. Because this is a lot. I mean, we've seen a lot so far. We did a lot of debunking and breaking down of stuff. But let's get some democracy in here. All right, so 2. All right, so you've seen enough, right? It's like all right, we get the point. My man is saying wild stuff, right? Getting wild. That's very entertaining. Do we have any 1s, or do the 2s have it? What's going on, y'all? All right, so we got 3 2s. All right, so we'll wrap it up from there. All right, we've seen enough. Because that video is like 30 minutes. So I'm like, you know what? I'm not gonna hold y'all too long because it's already getting kind of late here. So I'm gonna wrap it up. All right. Let me take some questions from y'all. Let me take some questions. As a matter of fact, put a 3 in the chat if you want to come onto the stream in the video. If I should open up a Google Meet room and get folks on camera. Put a 3 in the chat if you want to get on camera and ask questions. And we'll close out like that. If not, we can wrap it up. I'll be doing more streams, of course. We're doing the Monday Night Lives. So it's all good. It is all good. Depending on what my energy is like, too, I might hop on. Because I'll be streaming on Tuesdays and Thursdays. 8 p.m. Eastern on TikTok. But I might do a Friday Night Live, if y'all are down for that. But I know it's late. So we good? Did we get to it? We had fun? Everybody smashed the like button and whatnot? We can call it a night? We got to it? Anybody got any questions and whatnot before we jump? Before I let go. Oh, we got a 3. D, you want to pop on here? D want to pop on? She got stuff to say? Because we can laugh and joke around and whatnot together on here. You know, we could talk about how my man said drink the hardest liquor. My man said drink the hardest stuff. Drink the hard stuff. Who else got a 3 in here? Anybody else with the 3s? That was great, thanks. Plant-based wife, what's going on? Good to see you in here. And we can go over studies and whatnot too. I'm not gonna spend too much time, but who else want to jump on camera? Who else want to jump on? I'm going to plug, I just opened up, hold on 1 second here. I'm about to do something that I feel, for me personally, is a bit impressive. At least to me. May not be to y'all, but we'll see. We'll get your feedback here. but I have now started a Google Meet room. Yeah. And I am going to, all right, boom. Now what I'm going to do here, I'm gonna drop the link in the YouTube chat for y'all. So join the Google Meet. Boom. All right. So I joined the Google Meet. I might as well plop that in the chat. All right. So I dropped that in the Discord there. Well, I don't need to turn on my camera for that. All right. All right, Miss D. You live in here. So give me a second. Let me line myself up here.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, there we go. That's what I gotta do. Is that what I gotta do? So we got the presentation going. Yeah, put a 3 in there if you wanna jump on. And then I just have to change my window here. You're not popping up, I don't think, on the
Who,
screen.
me?
Yeah, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, you are. Okay, there you go. Okay, if anybody else wants to jump on to the Google Meet and chat, because I just opened up the floor for y'all folks who want to come in here and chat with me. Hold on a second. Let me change that screen up for you. All right. Here we go. So I'm trying to get I'm getting a little bit too big for my britches here. Hopefully I'm right here. All right. Can you see yourself in the stream?
No, I'm frozen.
Oh, you said you're frozen?
Yeah, there I go. I see myself now.
Gotcha. Okay, you see yourself. All right. So look at that. Technology, huh? Look at me.
Technology.
I'm about to get a job in broadcasting. You know what I'm saying? I'm about to get a job in broadcasting. Because let me tell you something. Look at this. I'm about to go see. I'm like, yo, NBC. Give me the broadcasting gig. All right. I don't gotta see me. I'll pop up here. All right. So what did you want to chat about? What did you want to say?
I heard him earlier when he said that you can almost reverse diabetes. And then as soon as he said that, he said, when you reverse it.
Yeah.
So predicted itself. I mean, just like seconds after each other.
Yeah. And a little bit of a slip, you know.
Yeah.
But you know what?
Yeah.
I give him credit for the optimism. You know what I'm saying? I give him credit for the optimism. He said when. I like that kind of language. I respect it. But he's also covering his bases where he says, you know, it can't be reversed in all cases, right?
Mhm.
I think that's a fair statement to make, right? We couldn't possibly say it's 100% reversible completely. That's a very strong claim, right? We may not be able to say all of that. But so these video reviews, I like to do these video reviews because you got a lot of people on the internet, a lot of chiropractors on the internet, you know, passing themselves off as nutritionists. Now they put doctor, right? They get like a doctor of something, so they put doctor in their name on their channel, but they're a doctor of something that is not even related to the topic they're talking about.
Right.
Right. And that's a little that's a little problematic, right? I would say. I think so. I think it's a little problematic. Now, if you know what you're talking about, right? Like that's great. Much respect to you if you know what you're talking about.
Right.
However, I mean, if you don't, then you probably shouldn't be, doing that where we got to dig like, oh, word, he's a doctor. What is he a doctor of? And then you look him up on the internet and then you find out he's a chiropractor. Nothing wrong with being a chiropractor, but you know what I mean? But if you're not a nutritionist, it's kind of weird to, if you're a chiropractor, well, just practice being a chiropractor. I think that's reasonable, right?
Yeah, it is. Very reasonable.
So, but I mean, if you're going to tell people, hey, if you're going to drink, man, drop that red wine and get you some vodka if you got heart disease. Get you some, don't get you no fruity mixed drink. Get the hard stuff.
Exactly.
Get that flammable stuff. Get that stuff that disinfects wounds.
That's gonna burn you.
Yeah. Get medical disinfectant. Get the good stuff. Get that stuff that's just gonna obliterate your digestive tract. You know what I mean? Get the stuff that's gonna significantly reduce the amount of oxygen going to your brain. That's funny.
And what did he say about the fruit? What was that he said about the fruit?
Oh yeah, about the fructose. He said, well, eating a few berries every once in a while.
Right.
Right. But how you doing? You've been making some gains lately, right?
I eat fruit all day long.
You eat fruit all day long. That's right. Where did you and what weight did you start at when you started with it?
I started at 348.
348. So you started at 348 and you're at 272. But it's almost going to be what,
October last year.
Say that again?
October of last year.
October of last year, right? So it's going to be almost a year for you, right? So you're down at 272, right? So like when you first started, you were on, what was the deal? You were on how many medications and whatnot, if you feel comfortable sharing with the chat?
I was on, if I'm correct, I think 21.
21. Yeah. How many now?
None.
There we go. And all that from fruit? You're supposed to be with the fatty liver and the insulin resistance and all of that, right? Because you were insulin resistant. You were hyper insulin resistant when we first started.
I was. I would eat that rice and boy, my sugar would shoot up.
Yeah.
I can eat a cup or two of rice and it don't even bother it no more.
Yeah.
I eat a whole bowl, about 4 cups, 6 cups of fruit and don't even bother. Matter of fact, sometimes my sugar go down.
Look at that. So it seems like my man Mr. Ekberg, he might want to have a conversation with you because it don't seem to work out that way.
Yeah, he might want to.
It seemed to be the opposite is the case, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been working that thing. I've worked that program. I just went straight through. I'm like, I can't be on all these medicines anymore. And I got sick of taking all them shots. And my endocrinologist has released me. He has released me.
There we go. Freedom.
Years of having to see him. No more. He said, my sugar's good. He said, you good.
Freedom. Look at that. And eating all of that fruit. That shouldn't have happened.
Yep.
Look at that. Freedom. And here in the States, in the United States, freedom is a big part of the brand, especially for Black folks, right?
Yes, it is.
That's right. Freedom is meaningful stuff. So, when we're off the meds and all of that type of stuff, that's what's going to do it. That's right. So big shout out to you too, because, you had the consistency, you followed the plan,
I think a lot of people realize that they follow the plan until they have a hiccup. But my hiccups went away. You know what I'm saying? You're not gonna have hiccups forever. You just gotta be consistent and continue doing it. Like my sugar would go up and I got really worried and I would get anxious. But then I started realizing, hey, my sugar ain't jumping up like it did before, And I started taking dips because I was taking so much insulin. I was taking 70 units of Lantus every night, and then I was taking 40 units of Humalog after every meal. And I don't take any Humalog. I don't take any Lantus. None. And my sugar doesn't go up and down like it used to. Like when I first started with the mangoes, it would go up a little bit. Doesn't go up like that anymore. You just got to be consistent and follow through. And just like I said, everybody gets hiccups. They're growing pains. So you're going to get the hiccup. But you just got to go through it,
Yeah. So, I always tell people, you don't want to avoid blood sugar spikes. What you want to do is improve your insulin sensitivity. Right? So, you have people where they're like, what, the best way to avoid a car accident is to never drive.
Yeah.
And that's true, but you're definitely not going to get better at driving if you don't drive.
Exactly.
So that's just an access and a resource that you just ain't going to have.
Yeah.
Right? And then you're stuck with greasy, buttery, right? The Ekberg diet, right? The sausage and bacon and all of that.
Yeah.
And what he tell you? And the thing too is the fact it's easy to sell people on the stuff they already eat. You tell people, yeah, butter, it's great. Bacon, fine. Sausage, sure. Burgers, just take the bun off. Steak, sure. Chicken, oh yeah, all of that's good. Because that's great, because that's all the stuff I already eat. Sign me up. It's easy to sell people on that idea.
It is.
Right? I mean, it's not the most effective way or even close to reversing insulin sensitivity, but it is great to sell it. Right? So it's like, well, you can, my blood sugar is low ever since I cut out all the carbohydrates and I've lost weight. Well, yeah, sure. If you take your pre-existing diet and the only thing you do is remove the carbs, well, you're just eating less in general. And then if you're not eating anything that is going to cause your pancreas to release insulin, well, then yeah, sure, you're going to have lower blood sugar. It's not an improvement in your insulin sensitivity. It's like you're just avoiding driving in order to avoid getting into an accident.
Yeah, sure.
Right? You ain't going nowhere, really. In the same way where if you ain't driving, you ain't going nowhere. But at least you ain't getting into an accident. So that's kind of that's the analogy there.
You said earlier also that something about the eating 3 times a day and eating 6 times a day. I barely ate 3 times a day. If I got 2 meals a day in back then, I was doing really good, but I continued putting on weight. It was after I joined the tribe and started eating, 4, 5, 6 meals a day consistently that I started losing the weight.
Gotcha. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because people under eating, they didn't crash their whole metabolism doing that.
Exactly. Yeah. I didn't realize I was doing that until you said something about it. Just like a few weeks ago, I was slacking up and I wasn't eating quite as much, or I would eat what I was supposed to, and I would eat multiple times a day, but I didn't eat enough of whatever I was eating.
Right.
So I had to pick that back up. Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, you know what? So now the new current task is where we get more interesting, right? Improving the fat metabolism.
Right.
Because you had a lot of these people and they talk about, oh, you just have one metabolism. It's either up or it's down. And it's like, ooh, wait until they find out that you got more than one metabolism. Wait until they find out. So now we're on a new path. We're on a new journey with new developments, right? So getting on to surpassing new plateaus, right? So now we're going to get under we're going to get under 270 soon, and then we're going to break below 260. So we on the way.
Trying to make that 250.
That's right. We are on the way.
Yeah. On the way. Oh.
All right, then. Well, you know what? It's late. It's already 10 o'clock. I know you got to get to bed.
I do.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to jump here.
Right.
But yeah, appreciate you coming on. What I'll let you have the last word.
I said, thank you for letting me come on.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. All right, then. You have a good night. Get some rest.
Right. Good night.
All right. All right, y'all. So having said that, I will see y'all on the next stream, everybody, and have a good night. Yeah.